Ever been screamed at for trespassing while sitting by your own pool? I have. Sunglasses on, lemonade in hand, living the dream when this clipboard warrior storms up, points at me like I'm public enemy number one and shouts, "Call the police! He doesn't belong here!" Ma'am, I own the place. Not a unit, not a lease, the whole building. But she didn't ask questions. She just saw a man she didn't recognize and assumed the worst. And that's how I met the HOA queen of Hollow Creek, by getting almost arrested on my poo. And trust me, it was only the beginning of the craziest drama roller coaster of my life. If you're watching this while pretending to read your HOA's 14-page email titled Community Decorum Expectations, welcome home. Pour your coffee. Or your bourbon. No judgment. Because this story, it's got everything. A power-tripping HOA president named Judith Harlan who waves her clipboard like it's Excalibur, 2 construction crews who brought bulldozers to a boundary dispute, and me, Noel Grayson AA, retired civil engineer who spent 3 decades drawing the official maps they forgot to check before trying to pave over my driveway. Spoiler, I didn't just design the road they messed with, I designed the entire zoning plan for half the county. So, when Judith Harlan and her HOA goons tried to erase my property line like it was written in pencil, let's just say I brought the receipts. And the permits, and the judge. Drop a comment below if you've ever encountered a nightmare HOA Karen yourself, and let me know where you're watching this video from. You won't believe the comeuppings she had coming her way. Her name was Judith Harlan, and she wore entitlement like it was stitched into her DNA. Mid-50s, silver bob, the kind of woman who turns a parking spot dispute into a police report. She had that energy, the clipped speech, the aggressive sunglasses, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Before I could even say a word, she was on the phone. "There's a suspicious man by the pool. He's refusing to leave." She made it sound like I'd crawled out of the sewer holding a crowbar instead of lounging poolside in flamingo trunks. Meanwhile, I hadn't even finished my second sip of lemonade. Now here's what Judith didn't know, and she really should have read the room. I wasn't visiting. I wasn't subletting. I wasn't even under her HOA jurisdiction. I had bought the entire Brimstone Court complex a month earlier. 48 units, a courtyard, and yes, that beautiful little swimming pool. Paid for in full. The paint on the deed's seal hadn't even dried yet. But instead of asking a single question, she went full gatekeeper of the realm on me. I could have shut it down right there, pulled the papers, waved the receipts. But some people need to walk straight into the wall before they realize the hallway isn't theirs. So I sat back, told her calmly that she was welcome to call whoever she needed. That probably confused her more than anything. I didn't yell, didn't flinch. And when Officer Maddox pulled up 20 minutes later, sun-beaten cruiser, tired eyes, clipboard in hand, I handed him 2 things, my ID and the deed. The real thing, signed, stamped, notarized, in enough ink to scare a banker. He read it twice, then turned to Judith and said the most beautiful 5 words I'd heard all week. "Ma'am, this pool's not yours." Judith's face went red like a fire alarm. Claimed the boundaries were wrong, that the signs had said Hollow Creek residents only for years. I offered her a lemonade. She declined. Instead, she leaned in real close and hissed, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you." That's when it hit me. I wasn't sitting in a neighborhood. I was sitting in a kingdom, and their queen had just realized she didn't own the throne. And people think once you've made it in tech, your biggest problem becomes choosing between beach houses. That's a myth. You know what success actually gets you? A front row seat to other people's nonsense with a better view. Before Brimstone Court, I'd lived in more rentals than I could count, and each one left a scar. I've had landlords who inspected apartments like they were doing surprise drug raids, and property managers who acted like returning your call was an act of charity. There was this one complex where the roof leaked every time it rained, but the rent went up because they added mulch to the flower beds. I used to think, if I ever get the chance to be the guy holding the keys, I'll do it different. That thought stayed in my back pocket for years, folded up like a promise. Brimstone Court wasn't pretty. Not at first. It had the kind of courtyard where weeds outnumbered grass, and a pool so neglected it could have doubled as a swamp. But there was something about it. It sat just on the edge of a neighborhood called Hollow Creek Estates, the kind of place where people named their dogs after wine and thought a strongly worded email counted as bravery. The buildings were solid, though, good bones. I didn't roll in and start swinging a hammer or waving my ownership papers. I kept it quiet. I wanted to see how things ran before I made a single change. And it didn't take long before I noticed something weird. The signs around the pool said, "Hollow Creek residents only," which was odd considering I had just bought the entire property the pool was sitting on. First, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe maintenance had recycled the wrong signage, but then I saw the padlock, then the freshly painted lines, then the branded pool chairs with the Hollow Creek HOA logo on the backrest. It was like waking up to find someone else's name on your mailbox. I started asking around. Most Brimstone residents shrugged. "It's been like that for years," they said. "They don't let us use it anymore." You'd think someone would have fought back, but Brimstone had been through bad management. People were tired. When you get ignored long enough, even injustice starts to feel normal. That was the part that stung most, not just the theft, but the silence around it. Then I met Mavis Clay, 72 years old, tiny, sharp, and completely unbothered by what people thought. She invited me into her unit like we were old friends, handed me a sweet tea, and sat me down like she'd been waiting to unload this story for a decade. "That pool used to belong to us," she said, "back when the old owners gave a damn." She told me Hollow Creek HOA had started helping out with pool maintenance 5 or 6 years ago, right around the time Brimstone's last management company gave up. It started with good intentions, but slowly the signs changed. Then the locks, then the patrols, and Brimstone residents, little by little, stopped showing up. "It wasn't theft," she said. "It was slow erosion, one fence post at a time." Her words hit like blueprints for betrayal. It was all starting to make sense. What I had assumed was neighborly cooperation was actually a quiet, calculated takeover. I started pulling files, deeds, plat maps, property surveys, everything I could get my hands on, and every document told me the same thing. That pool was part of Brimstone Court. Always had been. No easements, no shared usage agreement, not even a temporary lease on record. Judith Harlan and her HOA weren't just wrong. They were squatting. With signs, with codes, with confidence. And somehow, no one had ever called them on it. But what struck me wasn't just the theft. It was the confidence. The sheer unbothered gall it takes to put up new signs, change the locks, and pretend like the truth was just a matter of who yelled it louder. Hollow Creek didn't sneak into Brimstone with a crowbar. They walked in wearing sunglasses and holding clipboards. They printed rules and dared anyone to question them, and for years, nobody did. That kind of silence doesn't come easy. It's built from exhaustion and resignation, from people like Mavis, who stopped knocking because the door never opened. That's when I realized this wasn't just about pool access, it was about history. About how easily it can be rewritten when no one's watching. Judith hadn't stolen a pool, she'd stolen a shared space, a symbol. A place where neighbors used to gather, where kids learned to swim and adults cooled off after work. And she'd turned it into a line in her budget, an HOA bragging right. I thought about all the families in Brimstone who'd been locked out for years, who paid rent every month and never got a single splash of water in return. This wasn't a policy, it was erasure. I didn't storm over to Hollow Creek's front office, not yet. I started documenting everything, photos, dates, who used the pool and when. I wanted a paper trail so thick you could pave a driveway with it. Every day, I walked the line, literally. I mapped the property boundary with my old surveyor's tools, checked measurements, compared layouts, and what I found matched the records exactly. That pool was mine, or rather, it belonged to Brimstone, to the residents who'd been gaslit into believing they didn't deserve what was always theirs. It wasn't just fact, It was proof. And now it was personal. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of outrage, but because of clarity. See, when you've spent your life designing systems, roads, zoning maps, land assessments, you don't just see lines on paper, you see intent. And the intent here was clear. Judith's HOA had weaponized legitimacy. They used the language of rules to rewrite the reality of space, and the longer nobody pushed back, the deeper it sank in, like roots cracking a sidewalk. I opened a fresh notebook and started sketching what would become my counteroffensive. I wasn't going to knock politely. I was going to build a case so airtight even Judith's clipboard wouldn't survive the first gust. But before I brought the hammer down, I needed one thing she never saw coming: patience. And the reason she'd never see it? She'd forgotten the golden rule of land disputes. Never mess with a guy who owns graph paper and has nothing left to prove. It started with paper, taped to my front door, folded under my windshield wiper, slipped under the edge of my welcome mat like it was some kind of HOA calling card. Violation notices, 3 in 1 week. Unauthorized use of common area amenities. Non-compliance with aesthetic standards, and my personal favorite, improper pool attire. Now, I wasn't under Judith's HOA, and they had no jurisdiction over Brimstone, but that didn't stop them from issuing fines like they were running a Vegas casino. The irony? They were fining a man who owned the ground they were standing on. That's when I knew this wasn't confusion. This was control. The real kicker? The fines came with payment instructions. As if I was just going to send a check to Hollow Creek HOA for the privilege of being accused. That's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with a clipboard and a bad attitude. I was dealing with a system. And systems don't act on emotion. They act on precedent. Somewhere along the line, Judith's HOA had decided they owned more than their boundaries, and like all power built on assumption, they'd kept it intact by pushing only as hard as no one resisted. But that model breaks the second someone pushes back. My first real break came at the cafe down the street. I was reviewing renovation plans when a man slid into the seat across from me, tall, soft-spoken, wire-rimmed glasses, and a nervous glance over his shoulder every 10 seconds. "I'm Elijah," he said, like it was classified. "I'm the HOA secretary." I didn't say a word. Just let him talk. And talk he did. About Judith's inner circle, a handful of residents who got reduced fees, special maintenance, and the kind of protection usually reserved for witnesses in mob trials. Their loyalty, bought and paid for. Elijah had receipts. Literally. Copies of invoices marked consulting services paid out to a company owned by Judith's daughter, Alana Harlan. Thousands of dollars for community engagement research that never resulted in a single document. Landscaping contracts that billed for 10 hours of work in 3-hour windows. A yoga class that never happened but still showed up on the ledger. It wasn't just favoritism, it was fabrication. Judith didn't run a homeowners association. She ran a velvet-gloved extortion ring dressed up in khakis and board minutes. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I know enough to call one. Ruby Lynn was sharp, precise, and so polite it almost disguised how lethal she was in legal conversation. I gave her everything. The deed, the surveys, the financial documents Elijah had provided. She reviewed them like she was decoding state secrets, then looked up and said, "This is good, really good. That pool is clean, and so is your case." She explained that not only was Brimstone the legal owner, but Hollow Creek had no standing to collect any fees, issue violations, or restrict access. Their entire operation, at least when it came to the pool, was a castle built on sand. Ruby also pointed out something I hadn't considered. If they've been charging their residents for access to a property they don't own, she said, that could be fraud. And if they've blocked your tenants from using amenities they're legally entitled to, that's damages. It wasn't just about kicking them off the pool. This could become a case for restitution. Real accountability. That part hit me different. It stopped being about winning. It started being about restoring something people had slowly been told they didn't. That's when I made the decision. quietly and with a little grin. I wasn't going to announce anything, not yet. Let Judith think she still had the high ground. Meanwhile, I'd start gathering more documents, more statements. I'd interview longtime residents, catalog every change in signage, every gate installed, every dollar that couldn't be traced. The truth wasn't just buried. It was laminated and mounted in Hollow Creek's newsletter, but now I had a spade. And friends who'd been too scared to speak were finally coming forward. A few days later, I got a thick envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside were meeting minutes, typed, annotated, and highlighted. HOA meeting transcripts, complete with passive-aggressive remarks and off-the-record jokes that felt more like confessions. One note read, "Alana's company billed for the last event. No one showed, but we'll code it as community outreach." Another, "If Brimstone starts asking questions, remind them they've never maintained the pool. Let's control the story." It was a roadmap of corruption, signed, dated, and formatted in Calibri. Elijah had risked everything. He wasn't just passing documents, he was handing over his job, maybe his safety, and that mattered to me. I wasn't about to let a decent man take the fall alone. So I started logging every interaction I had with Hollow Creek from that day forward. Every notice, every message, every anonymous flyer slipped under a tenant's door, telling them to stay out of Hollow Creek property. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I just kept adding to the file. Because you can't build a case on rage. You build it on record. Ruby and I began sketching the legal framework. A cease and desist letter first, then discovery, then, if needed, a civil suit. But the strongest part of the case wasn't legal. It was human. I walked Brimstone with residents like Mavis and new tenants who'd moved in never realizing they were being denied access to a pool they technically paid for. Every story added a layer, a texture, and the more I listened, the clearer it became. Hollow Creek wasn't defending property. They were defending a narrative. And the truth? That was my territory now. I started getting calls, first from anonymous numbers, then blocked ones. "You think this is going to end well?" someone whispered and hung up. Another told me, "You're not from here. You don't understand how things work." I laughed, because what they didn't realize is that I built how things work. Literally, pipes, plats, permits. I knew how every street in this district was laid out because my hands had been on the original plans. They were playing checkers in a town I helped draw the chessboard for. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. That kind of clarity doesn't come from anger. It comes from understanding exactly where the edge of the paper ends. Judith had built a paper empire. But paper burns, and I was already holding the match. I stood by the fence that evening, watching the pool lights flicker on. My pool, the one they stole in plain sight. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own property. I felt like a witness waking up in time to stop a quiet kind of crime. What Hollow Creek didn't realize was this: their strongest weapon was silence, and their biggest mistake? Thinking I'd keep mine. Because from this moment forward, I wasn't just documenting, I was coming, and I wasn't coming alone. I've learned something about tyrants, big or small. They thrive in silence. But throw a party? They get twitchy. So I threw the loudest, happiest, most well-documented poolside barbecue Brimstone had ever seen. Flyers went out to every resident. We put up balloons. A vinyl banner across the fence read, "Welcome back to your pool." We had a DJ, hot dogs, fold-out chairs, even a bounce house for the kids. And standing near the entrance, arms crossed, was a uniformed security guard I'd hired just to keep things civil. Because the last thing I needed was Judith showing up in full clipboard regalia and calling in air support. The energy was electric. Tenants I'd barely met came down with casseroles and folding chairs. Kids cannonballed into the water. People were laughing, reconnecting. The pool, this long-contested symbol of control, was finally back in the hands of people who lived beside it. For the first time in years, Brimstone didn't feel like an apartment complex. It felt like a neighborhood. I was refilling lemonade pitchers when I saw her. Judith. She walked up like a storm in heels, flanked by two rent-a-cops in polos and earpieces, radiating tension like she charged it overnight. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The air tightened the moment she arrived. "This is private Hollow Creek property," she said, holding a piece of paper I'm almost certain she printed herself. "You are in violation of several municipal and HOA codes." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even stop smiling. "Judith," I said, "thanks for coming. Would you like a burger? We have veggie options, too." That didn't land well. She handed the paper to my security guy, who read it, shrugged, and handed it back. "Ma'am, this isn't enforceable." The crowd started paying attention. The tension was shifting. I reached into my folder and pulled out what I knew she feared most. Not confrontation, not embarrassment. Facts. "Here's the deed, the county plat map, and the surveyor's certificate. This pool belongs to Brimstone Court, has for 30 years, and no document you brought can override that." I handed copies to her, my security, and a few bystanders who'd gathered. Her face turned pale. Around us, the music didn't stop. The kids kept playing. The DJ turned up the volume slightly, as if to underscore the moment with a soundtrack. And then the most satisfying moment of the day, her guards stepped back. Not a word. Just a slow turn, quiet retreat. They knew. Everyone did. She came to shut us down, but she walked into a neighborhood block party with legal receipts. She looked around, realizing that for the first time people weren't looking at her with fear. They were looking at me with curiosity, and maybe even trust. She leaned in, voice low, sharp. "You think this is over?" I took a sip of sweet tea. "Judith, it hasn't even started." She didn't storm off. She backed away slowly, clutching her paper like it was a lifeline. Her heels clicked against the pavement, sharp and nervous, and for the first time I saw the cracks in the crown. Judith wasn't used to losing in public, especially not like this. Her board members weren't with her. Her control wasn't reinforced by whispers and nods. Just two guards who realized they were on the wrong property, and a crowd that had just watched their self-proclaimed queen get unseated by an engineer with a grill and a folder full of county filings. After she left, something happened I didn't expect. People lingered. Neighbors from Hollow Creek peeked through the fence. A few even walked over. One man introduced himself. Kyle, retired firefighter. "Didn't know we didn't own this pool," he said. "Always figured it was just assumed." That word, assumed, stuck with me. So much power changes hands in the shadow of assumptions. Judith had ruled by suggestion, never proof. And now, exposed in daylight, those assumptions crumbled like dried leaves in the sun. Elijah came by with a plate full of ribs and a look I hadn't seen on him before. Relief. "You've cracked her mask," he said. "That persona she wears? It's fragile, and now people know." We both looked at the pool. It didn't just look different, it felt different. Lighter. Like years of invisible weight had been lifted. It hit me then. When you rule through fear, joy is your worst enemy. And that afternoon, joy won. The DJ played another song. A kid yelled something about cannonballs. A woman in her 60s danced barefoot on the concrete, and I realized this wasn't just a barbecue. It was a rebellion wrapped in community spirit and paper plates. It was proof that if you push back the right way, with facts, with fairness, with food, you don't just win the argument, you win people. Judith thought she was showing up to shut down a party, but what she really walked into was the end of her reign, one burger at a time. We kept grilling until sunset. No police came. No one from her board showed up to defend her. And the people from Brimstone, they stayed. They laughed. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't waiting for the next notice or knock or threat. They were home. I looked out over the pool and knew exactly what was coming next. Judith wasn't going to go quietly. But now, I wasn't the only one paying attention, and next time she came, she'd be walking into something she couldn't bully or bury. a community with receipts and a reason. That night, I got a message from one of Judith's loyalists. Anonymous, of course. "You've embarrassed her," it read. "She's not going to forget that." I smiled, not because I underestimated her, but because I finally understood her. Judith had ruled like she was untouchable, but once you peel the title off a tyrant, all that's left is someone who's afraid to lose. And the more she tried to tighten her grip, the more people were going to slip through her fingers. The pool was just the beginning. The real story was about to start. I shut off the pool lights and stood there for a while in the dark, listening to the echo of voices still laughing in my memory, the kind of sound you can't fake, the kind HOA rules were never written to contain. We weren't finished, not even close. But for the first time since I bought Brimstone Court, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just ownership, belonging. And Judith? She felt it too. That's why she was rattled. Because once people start reclaiming what's theirs, they don't go back to rented fear. And if she thought the barbecue was bold, wait till she sees what happens when the community stops asking for permission and starts demanding accountability. The real rebellion had just begun. It started with a manila folder. Elijah handed it to me like it was radioactive. Inside, printouts, invoices, email threads, HOA money trail, thinly disguised as community improvement. "That's just the surface," he whispered, like Judith's clipboard had ears. The documents showed Hollow Creek had been spending thousands on consulting fees through a shell company registered under Alana Harlan's name, Judith's daughter. No business address, no staff, just wire transfers. Judith wasn't running a neighborhood, she was laundering trust. Then came the leases, old ones. Elijah dug them up from the storage unit behind the clubhouse, the kind you need a flashlight and a strong stomach to sort through. They told the story in slow motion. How Brimstone residents had their pool rights stripped with each renewal. First they dropped the word guaranteed, then shared. Then they rewrote it to limited access to amenities subject to availability, like the pool had turned into a rare bird you might glimpse if you were quiet enough. They didn't take access away, they dissolved it in legal fog. Meanwhile, Alana reached out to me directly. "I didn't know how deep it went," she said. "At first it was just favors, then it was forms, then it was offshore." The word hung there like mold in the drywall. She handed me a USB stick and walked away. Ruby reviewed the files that night. Tax records, transaction logs, board meeting notes edited after the fact. Judith had been rerouting HOA dues into a web of maintenance projects that never existed, then quietly moving money into accounts based in Belize and the Cayman Islands. I wasn't shocked. I was focused. I'd compiled everything. Timeline, testimonies, documents, and prepared to file suit. Ruby was already drafting the case brief, cross-referencing county records with internal HOA files. But the morning after I scanned the last page, something went wrong. The pool pump fried. Water spilling into the filter room, wires yanked, circuit burned. Sabotage, subtle enough to pass as an accident, but targeted enough to smell like panic. Judith's empire wasn't built to withstand scrutiny. It was built to collapse when questioned. We filed for an emergency restraining order the next morning. Ruby moved like a scalpel through the paperwork. We included sabotage, threats, financial misconduct, and something in the air changed. Residents started whispering, not just at Brimstone, but at Hollow Creek too. Judith's board members weren't looking as smug. And Elijah? He wasn't whispering anymore. They didn't just steal from the residents, he said. They stole their right to ask questions. That line stuck with me, because that's what power without accountability really is. A gag order disguised as governance. People began talking in the open. Tenants asked to see budgets. One woman from Hollow Creek cornered Elijah after a board meeting and said, "My husband's been paying those pool upkeep fees for 8 years and we never once saw a repair crew." The fear that had once stitched that community together was unraveling. Quietly, but quickly, Judith hadn't ruled with charisma. She'd ruled with confusion, intimidation, and a constant hum of plausible deniability. And now that people could see behind the curtain, They were grabbing torches. Mavis stopped me on my morning walk. She handed me a coffee and said, "You're doing what we all stopped believing was possible." I asked her what she meant. She pointed at the pool. "That was our town square. They didn't just chain a gate. They shut down a gathering place, a piece of our rhythm." I never thought of it that way, but she was right. It wasn't just about water and deck chairs. It was about visibility, dignity. Taking the pool was one thing. Making people feel they weren't allowed to ask why? That was the real theft. Ilana sent another file. This one wasn't spreadsheets, it was emails. Long threads between Judith and a developer named Marcus Lane. He wanted the pool land. She wanted a cut. They were already drafting proposals to split the parcel into 3 high-end townhomes. Judith's emails were full of phrases like, "once control is finalized," and "if the brimstone crowd stays docile." One attachment even included a mocked-up flyer. "Modern living, legacy view." I showed it to Ruby. She didn't even blink. "This isn't just a civil suit," she said. "This is criminal exposure." By week's end, residents from both neighborhoods were buzzing. It was like someone turned up the volume on the truth. A group of Brimstone tenants drafted a petition for a full audit of Hollow Creek's finances. What surprised me? Some Hollow Creek owners signed it too. That was the turning point. Judith could survive suspicion, but she couldn't survive internal fracture. Her power came from compliance, not conviction, and now the cracks were spreading. We posted flyers for a joint town hall. Nothing fancy, just a chance for people to ask questions together without fear. It wasn't war drums. It was something more dangerous to corrupt leaders. Organized curiosity. And the moment I saw the sign-up sheet fill with names from both sides of the fence, I knew the receipts weren't just revealing fraud. They were revealing the kind of unity Judith never planned for. That evening, someone spray-painted "thigh" on the side of the Brimstone maintenance shed. It was sloppy, red, and misspelled, but the message was clear. Someone was mad we'd started talking. I looked at it, sighed, and called it in. Ruby took pictures for evidence. I didn't scrub it off right away. Part of me wanted people to see it, because it wasn't vandalism. It was desperation with punctuation. Judith tried to claim it was a smear campaign. Released a statement at the next board meeting about malicious actors trying to destabilize the community. But the more she spoke, the more hollow it sounded. Her supporters weren't nodding as fast. Her threats didn't land the same. Fear had a slow leak now. You could feel it. Ruby finalized the court filing just before midnight. The brief was thick enough to stop a truck. Fraud, misuse of funds, obstruction, retaliation, and wrapped around all of it was the truth. Judith had turned HOA leadership into a private ATM with a rulebook. She'd polished it with protocol, dressed it in procedure, but underneath, theft is still theft. That's when Elijah made a quiet suggestion. "What if we don't just take her to court?" he said. "What if we take back the whole HOA?" It stopped me cold, because up until that moment, I was only focused on defense. But he was right. If you want the rules to change, you don't beg the referee. You become the new rulebook. So we printed new flyers, launched a resident campaign. Audit first, then elections. No more secrets, no more fear. And the residents? They showed up. Turns out when people finally feel heard, they don't whisper, they roar. And Judith? She wasn't just losing control of the narrative, she was losing control of the vote. The meeting was already a circus by the time I arrived. Folding chairs filled the Hollow Creek Community Center. Residents packed in shoulder to shoulder, programs flapping like protest signs. Judith sat up front, back straight, eyes sharp. Her loyalists clustered nearby, flanked by the usual clipboard crew. The agenda was clear. Ban me from the pool and any influence over community operations. Never mind that I didn't belong to Hollow Creek. Judith was still swinging the crown like it meant something. But her crown didn't shine, it rusted. Especially when built on fear. But this wasn't the HOA kingdom she used to rule. As soon as she started her speech, full of legal jargon, veiled threats, and buzzwords like neighborhood integrity. I walked to the front with a flash drive, plugged it into the projector, clicked play. No music, no commentary, just receipts. Email threads between Judith and her daughter about fake consulting work, spreadsheets with pool maintenance invoices that funded vacations, meeting notes edited post facto. Every time she opened her mouth, another line of evidence filled the screen. Judith's voice got higher, faster, louder, like she thought volume could rewrite facts. "This is slander," she barked. "None of this proves anything." I stepped aside. Ruby stood up from the back. "Actually, it proves wire fraud, misuse of HOA funds, and obstruction of oversight." That's when the doors opened, and 2 uniformed officers walked in. Officer Maddox Stone led the way. He didn't ask questions. He walked to Judith, read from a warrant, and turned her around in front of the entire board. Her bracelets that day weren't jewelry. They clicked. There's a sound people make when a lie finally snaps. It's not cheering, it's relief. That room exhaled. Even some of her allies looked down. Elijah stood. "Motion to remove Judith Harland from HOA board pending legal proceedings." It passed unanimously. Nobody even raised a hand in protest. A vote was held. New board members were elected. Brimstone got formal recognition in the HOA charter as a cooperative partner. Pool access was restored to both communities, equally, clearly, and forever etched in the bylaws. That weekend, I oversaw a small construction crew install something into the back wall of the pool. A mosaic, designed by a local artist. 2 sides, blue and green, blending into one. At the center, 2 trees, their roots tangled. One labeled Brimstone, the other hollow. The inscription underneath, "What was divided can be shared." Kids played while we worked. Residents from both sides asked questions, smiled, ate snacks someone brought down from their patio. The gate between us was still there, but nobody used it anymore. Alana showed up that day too. She didn't say much, just helped paint a bench near the deep end alongside 2 teenagers from Brimstone. Later, she pulled me aside. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I want to help fix what she broke." I nodded. Because redemption doesn't start with a speech. It starts with showing up. She'd been used, yes, but now she was choosing differently. And that choice mattered. Over the next few weeks, things changed in quiet ways. The HOA website was updated to include real-time budget reports. Maintenance requests got answered within 48 hours. A resident newsletter began circulating with meeting recaps and future plans. But the biggest change wasn't policy, it was posture. People looked at each other differently now. Neighbors knocked on doors instead of filing anonymous complaints. Hollow Creek started to feel less like a gated concept and more like a living place again. Mavis said it best when she invited me to her birthday barbecue. "I used to count how many times I heard from the board. Now I count how many people wave when I walk my dog." She wasn't being poetic, she was measuring connection. That's what Judith had stolen under the guise of order, the right to belong without bending the knee. And now that people felt seen, they didn't need to be policed. There was one last moment that brought it all full circle. I sat by the pool one evening, just me and a glass of iced tea. The water shimmered under the new lighting system. Someone had left a floaty drifting slowly in the deep end. For a minute I just listened. Laughter from a balcony. A splash. Footsteps on the pavement. A place alive, not managed. And then I thought, sometimes justice doesn't knock, it cannonballs. And that mosaic, it's still there. No plaque, no politics, just color, story, and silence that says, "We remember." Because whole crowns don't shine, they rust, especially when they're built on fear. But this place? It's rooted now, in the people who stayed, the ones who spoke, and the men who decided a pool was worth fighting for, not because of what it held, but because of who it belonged to. A few months later, I was asked to give a short speech at the first official joint HOA Community Day. I kept it simple. This isn't about a pool, I told them. It's about remembering who owns the neighborhood. Us. Not the loudest voice, not the thickest rule book. Just us. The crowd clapped, not because it was a great line, but because it was true. Ownership isn't about power. It's about responsibility and the willingness to share it. Elijah was elected board president. Olana was appointed to an oversight committee. And the budget? Balanced, published, and boring. Just how we like it. Brimstone and Hollow Creek held their first combined summer cookout. Someone made a joke about HOA-approved burgers, and for once, nobody was afraid to laugh. That's what healing looks like. Not headlines. Just moments. Restored. The judge ruled on Judith's case not long after. Guilty on counts of fraud, misappropriation of funds, and obstruction. She received a sentence, but what struck me wasn't the prison time. It was the silence in the courtroom when the sentence was read. That sound of consequence, of an empire made of paper, finally meeting the rain. Every so often, I catch someone staring at that mosaic like they're trying to decode it. I never explain it, not anymore, because if they live here long enough, they figure it out. They feel it. The water's warmer now, not physically but spiritually. It's safe. It's ours. It's not just about the pool, it's about what rises when the tide of fear finally recedes. And me? I still live here, still have my evening iced tea by the water, still hear the laughter echo off the walls I once fought to reclaim. Because justice didn't knock, it cannonballed, and now every splash reminds me why. I still sit by that pool some evenings, drink in hand, watching the ripples stretch out like echoes of everything we reclaimed. Not just water rights or paperwork, but dignity. Voice, that sense of community they tell you is gone, but isn't, if someone's willing to stand still and say, not here, not this time. You know, I didn't come to Brimstone looking for a fight. But I stayed because the fight found me. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the quiet battles, the ones over gates and rules and forgotten neighbors, they matter. Because the people trying to take a little power here and there, they're counting on us not noticing. So notice. Speak. Protect the ordinary, because sometimes justice doesn't knock. It cannonballs, and the splash can reach a whole lot farther than you think. If you've listened this far, here's what I hope you take with you. We told a story about HOA corruption, but really this was about how systems crumble when good people stop paying attention, about how easy it is for manipulation to wear the mask of leadership. Judith ruled like a mayor of a paper kingdom, until the rain came, and that rain, it was made of receipts, voices, questions, and quiet courage, the kind that doesn't shout, but doesn't back down either. This wasn't just a win for Noel. This was a win for anyone who's ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of order. It's a reminder that when you give people their voice back, the neighborhood doesn't just recover, it transforms. And sometimes all it takes is one person to step into the splash zone and say, "This pool belongs to all of us." If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that justice doesn't always wear a robe, sometimes it wears flip-flops, go ahead and hit that like button, leave a comment below, and tell us, have you ever faced a neighborhood power trip? We want to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because our next episode, let's just say it involves a rogue garden committee, a fake raccoon infestation, and a retired IRS auditor with a lawnmower and a grudge. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for being part of this community. We cannonballed together, and the ripple's just getting started.